Welcome to the Folk School on Willow Creek, featuring University Distinguished Professor Tom Easern, singing and telling stories from the salon on Willow Creek.
I need a bed for the night, boys, and my horses need hay. I've been riding that road line on the hot dish highway. It was built on the prairie, was not sheltered by a tree, where the wild flowers bloomed around it and the wild winds whistled free. Its walls were made of sod, of which there was no lack, poplar poles for rafters in the Old Sod Shack. Though it's nearly vanished now, it brings our memories back, for we once had homely comforts in that old sod shack. What cost us very little to uprear our dome of soil, a little patient labor and our home up in style. Small need there was for nails, and we owed no lumberjack for the shingles on our roof of the old sod shack. Though it's nearly vanished now, it brings the memories back, for we once had homely comfort in the old sod shack. Now it's nearly out of use. Place is taken by a more pretentious mansion with shade trees planted nigh. But North Dakota's history will surely be off the track if no page is written there for the old sod shack. Nearly vanished now, it brings our memories back, for we once had homely comforts in that old sod shack. Let us kindly think about it as our way through life we take. Let us treasure all these memories for old friends and friendship's sake. May the last chip of our memory, which old time will surely pack, be the one that bears the image of that old sod shack. Though it's nearly vanished now, comforts in that old sod shack. Well, it's a song that deserves to be remembered. It's a song of memory. It's a song for the sake of memory. The Old Sod Shack is one of those that is a discovery. I should say a rediscovery of the Willow Creek Folk School. I think it debuted on this program, well, a year and a half ago. Sung it a couple times since then, and here it is up tonight, because thinking in particular here, kind of at the wrap up of 2000, what year is it? 2023, of not exactly full circle, but the line of descent. How's that? One of the things we find out about Great Plains folk song is that people wrote it. It's not some anonymous tribal thing that just stretches back there into antiquity and nobody can track it down. Most of it can be tracked down. And it may have old lineage. Some of it goes back to the 1600s, but, we can pin it down here in this part of the country. And this one happens to be written by this Old Sod Shack, written right at the turn of the 20th century by Martin E. Quigley of Park River, North Dakota. And he wrote it for an Old Settlers Association meeting. And he got up in a men's quartet, singing in 4-part harmony, because people could sing in those days, by God, at the drop of a hat. And then it circulated. It's picked up in some newspapers after that, so it didn't entirely die out, but it pretty much, by mid-20th century, it's gone. Who's brought it back? Well, we brought it back because it's worth having. It's a part of our folk literature of the Great Plains. And we're kind of dedicated to restoring that. And so it takes that original author. Now, this song, then, was, in fact, first set down. The text I'm singing was set down by the songcatcher from the University of North Dakota. Oops, I said that name, didn't I? Franz Rickaby. Franz Rickaby. We'll talk a little more about him later. Franz Rickaby, the North Dakota songcatcher of the early 20th century who died too young. So you got an original ballad author. You've got a songcatcher who sets it down. Matter of fact, my text I get from his notebook, which is in the University of Wisconsin Music Department Library. And then it lies there, fallow, for generations. And then we pick it up. And now our hope is it's back into circulation. And we'll try to see that it remains so. That's the Old Sod Shack, starting off Willow Creek Folk School number 157 tonight. Hey, you want to say anything from the North Dakota State University Press, speaking of bringing literature to the fore?
Sure. I think I mentioned that Dave Solheim's collection of poetry, Seasoned, was on its way. It arrived, so we already started shipping that out. Several people had ordered it through Amazon, so we placed a pretty good order with them. And the author is pretty darn excited. He hasn't gotten to see him yet, so they're on their way to him too.
I'm excited to see Dave's new collection too.
Yeah.
He's an old friend. Since about the first time when I first moved to North Dakota.
And he was the centennial poet
of North Dakota in 1989.
Yeah. So
and Chuck was centennial balladeer.
Right. This was a pretty good year for the arts.
Yes,
so today, our season for the classes and for publishing is kind of wrapping up. I took all my interns out for lunch today, and we had just a really nice, relaxing visit, learning more about each of us as people instead of worker bees, getting all the work done. So it was really nice to get to visit with them. They next week is their last week on campus.
That's a part of bringing about a literary efflorescence in the region, which I sometimes forget because I think, you're putting the books out. That's the thing. You're putting works of literature into print, but you're also training a new generation of editors who will keep... Not just
editors, but the business of publishing.
They'll keep print culture... The people who will keep print culture alive.
That's right. Yeah. And they're excited to be having a part in that too. And I was glad to learn 2 of the students are going to be vying for the graduate assistant position next fall. So Mike has another semester and a summer, but then we train a new graduate assistant in all this, and I've got a couple people already interested in it. So I'm very hopeful about that. I think that's a good sign.
Speaking of print culture, I finally got my copies of Kansas History, the Journal of the Kansas State Historical Society. There we are, yeah. One of the things with the rediscovery of these ballads, we're bringing them from lost archive into found archive, and methodically putting them forward into the state historical journals. First, South Dakota with the story of the little Old Sod Shanty on the Claim, and now Kansas History with this lead article for fall of 23, The Stern Old Bachelor, Arthur L. Stokesbury and his Ballad. That's the story of the ballad, The Stern Old Bachelor, which we've told here in the Willow Creek Folk School, and it will recur, I suppose, yet. And I'm fairly long in the tooth. I've seen a few papers and journal articles, more than I can count, into print. But bringing these ballads back into currency is something that gives me great satisfaction. Including another one. I know that I think Melvina and John out there, and they're maybe the only people who know anything with us tonight about Cherokee Bill, the outlaw. So he's often referred to as the most notorious of the outlaws of the Indian Territory of the late 19th century. And it was, again, about a year ago, I stumbled across this jailhouse ballad. It was printed in the Caney, Kansas newspaper, but it was a report coming from Oprah in Fort Smith, where Cherokee Bill, Crawford Goldsby was formerly name he went by, but he's known in the press as Cherokee Bill. He was awaiting the gallows, having been sentenced to hang for murder by the hanging judge, Isaac Parker. And I thought, I was hankering to sing this song. There's a couple of things about it. One of them is it's a bona fide first-person ballad by the outlaw himself from the jailhouse. It doesn't get any better than that. This is like Ned Kelly's letter from jail in Australia or something like that. And speaking of Australia, it's dead certain that Cherokee Bill's own ballad is based upon the Australian ballad, The Wild Colonial Boy. And I began to put the pieces together. The Australian ballads, bushranger ballads, traveled, and they're mixed up with the Irish ballads that are their progenitors, but there's this type of outlaw ballad. They traveled to California from Australia with the gold rush, just like people from across North America were heading to California. Cherokees from the Indian Territory were prominent in the gold rush in California in the 1850s. And so there is this viable connection where these Australian outlaw ballads get back to Oklahoma, and Cherokee Bill then latches on to one of them. And it's dead certain that it goes back to Ireland via Australia. And does he know where it comes from? I don't know, but that's not the point. Well, okay, that's one of the things that's really interesting about it, and an unusual thing in the North American balladry. But then I got interested in Cherokee Bill himself. And I thought, I'm going to look at these southern Kansas newspapers that were so intensely interested in this outlaw activity along the border, and there's some interesting stuff in there. But it got real interesting to me when it began to trace the burial records and that sort of thing of Cherokee Bill. And his father, let me see if I can find this thing. His father evidently was a former slave. He said he was a slave in Alabama before the Civil War. He served briefly in the Confederate Army and then got, sort of liberated into the Union Army. After the war, came west and became a Buffalo soldier, was at Fort Concho, where he took up with a laundress. and they were married. I'm looking at my stuff from findagrave.com here. Yeah. William Scott, also known as George Goldsby, 10th U.S. Cavalry Sergeant. And his wife was later known as Ellen Beck Lynch in the Indian Territory. And Scott, a black man, got into a shooting scrape. Now, when you read stories about the life of Cherokee Bill, they talk about how his father abandoned him. That's one of his problems, why he went bad. His father didn't exactly abandon him. He got beat up by some white citizens in Fort Concho. He and some other Buffalo soldiers took weapons from the armory and went in and shot some of those guys who'd beat him up. So there was this essentially a race riot at Fort Concho. And he went on the lam. And that's why Cherokee Bill had no blood father. He stayed with his mother. His mother eventually wound up at Fort Gibson, remarried, and Cherokee Bill went to live with an auntie. And that relationship, I'm not entirely sure. You know the usage among Native peoples. Auntie is a broad class of supporting females around a family. So blood relative, probably not. Just an auntie. It puzzles me, how did Cherokee Bill learn to write down things? How did he learn to read and write and develop sort of a poetic sense? I don't know. I want to know more about Auntie Amanda Foster there, and if she had maybe something to do with that. Well, he's eventually, although he made one jailbreak, he was quickly recaught and tried for another murder, and that happened in the jailbreak, and he succumbed to the verdict of the hanging judge in 1896. He's buried at Fort Gibson, as is his mother and other family members. Family means something. As a matter of fact, the guy, Isaac, what's his last name? I've lost it now. The guy who captured Cherokee Bill and then his compatriots brought him into Nowata as a prisoner. Cherokee Bill's brother bushwhacked him and shot him down after Cherokee Bill was hanged. So family mattered for quite a bit among them. So I'm about to lay on you again with a new appreciation, Cherokee Bill's song, evidently by his own hand, according to reporters at the time. And I'm writing it with a little bit different sense, that there's a race war in the history of the family. There are slaves on both sides of his ancestry. And so when he picks up those Australian words about scorn to live in slavery or to wear a convict's brand, they mean something to him. And that's why he appropriated them. Okay, this is a good rollicking ballad. Come on, you jolly highwaymen and outlaws of the land, who scorn to live in slavery or wear a convict's brand. Attention pay to what I say and value it if you will, while I relate the natural fate of desperate Cherokee Bill. That bold and brave highwayman, as you all may understand, was banished by the natural life from the Indians' happy land. From Nowata town, while I renowned the very first man he killed, his daring deeds entitled him to desperate Cherokee Bill. Old Cherokee Bill and his comrades rode out one afternoon, not thinking on the hand of death that might o'ertake them soon. The sheriff's posse did advance, they quickly on the hill. The sheriff's posse did advance to take old Cherokee Bill. That stanza in particular is so evocative of the Australian battles. Says Cherokee Bill to his comrades, if you will prove true to me, today we gain our liberty and ride most manfully. We'll stay with you, says bold Bill Cook, to surrender we'll never agree. Although there is a dozen of them and of us there is only three. Take on from me your cowardly dog, surrender I never will. I'll fight to stay until I die, says desperate Cherokee Bill. He left the sheriff's posse, and one was cold and still, for he had been pierced by a bullet from the rifle of Cherokee Bill. And when he made good his escape to Raw, he went straightway. The people were afraid of him to travel night or day. Every day some daring deed the newspaper would tell, concerning the daring young highwayman called Desperate Cherokee Bill. I'm not going to say it's a mitigating factor for the dozen or so men that Cherokee Bill shot dead, but by God, he left us a hell of a ballad. And he's a part of that chain, too. He passed it on to a newspaper reporter who put it in the Caney newspaper, then it gets into the hands of the Willow Creek Folk School after lying dormant for more than a century. And today we have it again. Well, do we have any friends with us tonight?
We do. I was just taking note. Joe Garderwin writes that his first assignment in the Air Force was at Fort Concho. How about that?
It's got a checkered history, evidently. Then and now.
And then MJ is out there tuning in to your program, and she's got the TV on.
She got a score for us?
Well, she hasn't shared one yet. But she's got the TV turned down so she can listen to the...
You know, our friend Brad Benton is a Furman graduate. And I told him I'd give the Furman Paladins very little chance to prevail against the Griz tonight.
Oh, okay.
He argued that a bit. But I don't think he knows anything about Montana playing football in Missoula. That it's a tough road.
We've got a few people remarking on the poinsettias, and apparently that's pretty popular. Other people have their poinsettias out too.
It's time, isn't it?
Yep.
Yes, indeed.
It's kind of a happy plant to have around.
Yeah. Well,
I wanted to say something about a birthday. A birthday?
Is there a birthday?
You have birthday of Mary Jo Bremner of the Blackfeet Nation.
That's right. We've got various birthdays to make note of. Are you ready for them?
I'm ready.
The birthday of Mary Jo Bremner of the Blackfeet Nation of Montana. And good luck to the Griz tonight, MJ. And the birthday of my daughter Emily, who's gone through a bit of a surgery today, and I understand it's gone well. Can you tell her to just take it easy? No, you can't. She
said she's got her feet up.
Yeah,
so
well,
that's Emily taking it easy.
I suppose, but you know, she was born. It turns out on the same day as was
who?
The greatest novelist ever to grace the culture of the North American plains, Willow.
How did you plan that?
The Willow has a namesake under the table at your ankles there right now.
That's right. Willow, the book beagle.
That's right. Well, she would yesterday have been 150 years old.
It wasn't a few months ago, I guess now, but we saw the unveiling of the Willow Cather statue in Statuary Hall.
That's right.
In Washington.
That's right.
So
Cather's making a comeback with literary scholars so au courant. There was a slump here at about the turn of this century, but Cather's back in a big way. Well, speaking of which, are you ready?
I'll forget that.
It is a custom, and it happened. We're doing it in observance of Cather's birthday, but also as an annual ritual to hear from Cather and her foremost novel, My Antonia. And I've asked Dr. Kelly to come forward with a Cather Christmas.
I guess we've been doing the folk school long enough that we can have traditions.
We have, yeah.
And I get to sit on the milk can and hopefully not fall off. So this is from My Antonia. On Christmas morning, when I got down to the kitchen, the men were just coming in from their morning chores. The horses and pigs always had their breakfast before we did. Jake and Otto shouted "Merry Christmas" to me and winked at each other when they saw the waffle irons on the stove. Grandfather came down wearing a white shirt and his Sunday coat. Morning prayers were longer than usual. He read the chapter from St. Matthew about the birth of Christ, and as we listened, it all seemed like something that had happened just lately and near at hand. In his prayer, he thanked the Lord for the first Christmas and for all that it had meant to the world ever since. He gave thanks for our food and comfort and prayed for the poor and destitute in great cities where the struggle for life was harder than it was here for us. Grandfather's prayers were often very interesting. He had the gift of simple and moving expression. Because he talked so little, his words had a peculiar force. They were not worn dull from constant use. His prayers reflected what he was thinking about at the time, and it was chiefly through them that we got to know his feelings and his views about things. After we sat down to our waffles and sausage, Jake told us how pleased the Shimerdas had been with their presents. Even Ambrose was friendly and went to the creek with him to cut the Christmas tree. It was a soft, gray day outside, with heavy clouds working across the sky and occasional squalls of snow. There were always odd jobs to be done about the barn on holidays, and the men were busy until afternoon. Then Jake and I played dominoes, while Otto wrote a long letter home to his mother. He always wrote to her on Christmas Day, he said, no matter where he was, and no matter how long it had been since his last letter. All afternoon he sat in the dining room. He would write for a while, then sit idle, his clenched fist lying on the table, his eyes following the pattern of the oilcloth. He spoke and wrote his own language so seldom that it came to him awkwardly. His effort to remember entirely absorbed him. At about 4 o'clock, a visitor appeared, Mr. Shimerda, wearing his rabbit skin cap and collar and new mittens his wife had knitted. He had come to thank us for the presents and for all of grandmother's kindness to his family. Jake and Otto joined us from the basement, and we sat about the stove enjoying the deepening gray of the winter afternoon and the atmosphere of comfort and security in my grandfather's house. This feeling seemed completely to take possession of Mr. Shimerda. I suppose in the crowded clutter of their cave, the old man had come to believe that peace and order had vanished from the earth or existed only in the old world he had left so far behind. He sat still and passive, his head resting against the back of the wooden rocking chair, his hands relaxed upon the arms. His face had a look of weariness and pleasure, like that of sick people when they feel relief from pain. Grandmother insisted on his drinking a glass of Virginia apple brandy after his long walk in the cold, and when a faint flush came up in his cheeks, his features might have been cut out of a shell. They were so transparent. He said almost nothing and smiled rarely, but as he rested there, we all had a sense of his utter content. As it grew dark, I asked whether I might light the Christmas tree before the lamp was brought. When the candle ends sent up their conical yellow flames, all the colored figures from Austria stood out clear and full of meaning against the green boughs. Mr. Shimerda rose, crossed himself, and quietly knelt down before the tree. His head sunk forward. His long body formed a letter S. I saw grandmother look apprehensively at grandfather. He was rather narrow in religious matters and sometimes spoke out and hurt people's feelings. There had been nothing strange about the tree before, but now, with someone kneeling before it, images, candles, grandfather merely put his fingertips to his brow and bowed his venerable head, thus Protestantizing the atmosphere. We persuaded our guest to stay for supper with us. He needed little urging. As we sat down to the table, it occurred to me that he liked to look at us and that our faces were open books to him. When his deep-seeing eyes rested on me, I felt as if he were looking far ahead into the future for me, down the road I would have to travel. At 9 o'clock, Mr. Shimerda lighted one of our lanterns and put on his overcoat and fur collar. He stood in the little entry hall, the lantern and his fur cap under his arm, shaking hands with us. When he took grandmother's hand, he bent over it as he always did and said slowly, "Good woman." He made the sign of the cross over me, put on his cap, and went off in the dark. As we turned back to the sitting room, grandfather looked at me searchingly. "The prayers of all good people are good," he said quietly.
You'll probably remember, Dr. K, my mother's reaction to hearing that passage when I read it into a talk that I heard. She said that passage, the prayers, that maxim, the prayers of all good people are good, was bad doctrine. It's not Lutheran. Because the prayers of all people are good. All prayers are good, she said. Mm-hmm. And she had me. Yes, indeed. Well, remember that. It could come up again. It might be on the quiz at the end. Oh. And we'll apologize on behalf of the unrepentant canine members of the household who, as soon as Dr. Kelly left her post here, felt licensed to get into a wrestling match. And you know who started it?
Angie.
No. But we're happy to see it. The Beagle's been battling a case of kennel cough and whatever that respiratory thing of mysterious respiratory disease of dogs is just going around.
Yes, which we followed up with some antibiotics, and she made a really quick turnaround, so she is on the mend.
For people who've been inquiring about Willow's health, much better.
Yeah.
She was picking the fight back there. Now, we have another balladic hero to introduce here. One quite recently discovered up in the highline country of Montana. H.E. Prawl is his name. He always went by H.E. by his middle initial, by his initials only. And as best I can take it, he lived in another number of central Montana foothill towns. Wolf Point, Clyde Park, Ritchie, in the 1920s. Before that, he'd been a cowboy in Western Canada, evidently, and then made his home scrabbling out a living in various ways. He farmed, and in fact was evidently a rather progressive farmer, but he had the call to preach. he didn't have any divinity degree, however, so he just commenced in preaching. It looks like, as best I can tell, he started preaching in Clyde Park in 1923. And he moved on from there to other towns like Ritchie. He was appointed finally by the ME Church, Methodist Episcopal Church, to the pulpit there in Clyde Park, and a couple other pulpits after that. And I can kind of date when he started writing poetry. Yeah, first poetry I can attribute to him is in 1929, published in the Wolf Point Herald. Now, I'm not going to say that H.E. Prowl is a genius poet. And he was a rather fervent and revivalist preacher. Sometimes his poetry gets a little heavy-handed, but sometimes he also is trying to make money, placing it with magazines. So some of it is clearly written for money, but sometimes he hits the sweet spot. And there'll be some other pieces of his we'll bring forward in future folk schools, but this is the time of year to bring back his December 1929 poem. 13th of December 1929 is published in the Wolf Point Herald, A Christmas Pageant with the Practical Result. This is fairly long, and Susanna, I may need help page turning on this rascal.
Oh.
Okay? Looks like I've got 1, 2, 3, 4. So let's arrange it in our usual fashion, and I really could use the help. Are we good? And those of you who are real students of balladry will recognize the tune that I set it to. 'Twas Christmas Eve upon the prairie. We hovered round the fire. We could hear coyote wary. Seemed as if he never tired. We were thinking, softly talking, Christmas time we'd known before. The Christmas story, some were mocking. They had no faith in Bible lore, but just the 4 men sat unheeding, with his head so frosted o'er, bowed above his paper reading. Seemed our chatter to ignore. Gaunt was he, hard as flint rock, fire fearless, tireless, without hate. We had seen him nurse the thin stock, and we knew his heart was great. Wintry wind was wildly raging, and the night was a bitter cold, and the howling blast was waging o'er upon the young and old. Lean and hungry roamed the cattle, and the horses too were thin. We could hear Suddenly there came a tapping. Surprise was written on each face. I get it sounded tapping, tapping. The foreman rose up from his place as he threw the wide door open. Huddled in the biting store stood a man there blindly groping, and we saw a woman's form. Once within, he told his story, how they tried the pillaging, but the landlord, though quite sorry, had no place for kith or kin. Sadly down the road they started, seeking shelter for the night. Spent and lost, broken hearted, they had seen our feeble light. With no place had we for any woman, and the foreman's face grew red, but her patient eyes were brimming. We couldn't hear what the man had said, but we saw the changed expression flash across the foreman's face. After that, we had a session that upset the whole blamed place. Kim the cook was heating the water, bread was on doctor's trail. All the fires were made much hotter to resist the winter's gale. So the night passed, come the morning, when we heard the baby's cries. Though we'd had the doctor's warning, every cowboy wiped his eyes as we lingered round the table. After breakfast time was done, one who'd called the story fable asked the boss in jest and fun, say, boss, what made you change so quickly? When those folks came in that way, though at first you looked right sickly, you got busy right away. Then the boss, his old eyes snapping, shifted slightly, then replied, say, partner, did you ever Well, it was sort of acting, though a pageant was what 'twas called, and the folks were simply packed in till the ushermen were stalled. Well, it was a Christmas story, called it fable, called it fact. Christ child in all his glory was the center of each act. Now you all know the claims of history. Shepherds merged of fact and mystery, always guide men afar as they fall on that star. But the fact made me wonder, as I saw that pageant play, was that foolish landlord's blunder when he turned the prayer away. And so last night, their explanation that they tried the village in made me see their situation, and I saw that play again. Now you men will long remember what that pageant tried to say. For a night of bleak December brought a glorious Christmas day. Now Slim had fetched a neighbor lady. Now she brought the youngster in. Every man must see that baby. Everyone was proud to sin. We remembered that old stable where the holy couple went. Slim remarked was no fable, and every cowboy bowed to sin. Thank you, Reverend Prawl. You know, there's someone else, a couple other parties we should probably thank for the legacy of balladry we have with us today, survived through the various stages that I'm talking about. One of them is these newspaper editors who would give space. How many stanzas was that? That'd have been 8 minutes to sing it, I'll bet. Yeah, this is an editor who had a confidence in the attention span of his readers.
Yes.
And there's something to learn from that about the state of mind of people a century ago on the prairies. There was a literary and balladic culture in place there. And they liked this sort of material in their papers. And so the editors and the public have a real role then that this literature exists with us down to present day. I'm going to sneak back for another word about Franz Rickaby. I kind of warned that it would. North Dakota's most memorable songcatcher. Oh yeah, I know young Will out in the Bismarck also collected some ballads, particularly some cowboy ballads, but Franz Rickaby was a declared song collector with a mission when he came to Grand Forks, North Dakota in 1917. What I like about him is unlike say John Lomax and other great ballad collectors of a century ago, Rickaby doesn't seem to be motivated by fame, by stature. Rickaby seems motivated by love, the pure joy of discovering and singing a ballad, the human interaction of collecting and performing, an affection too for the ordinary people who are the repository of such a great folk literature. So he arrived on the prairies and took to ballad collecting, inspired by John Lomax's cowboy songs and other frontier ballads, but also with in hand a master's degree from Harvard University, where he had to have been aware of Kitty Kittredge, the great Shakespearean scholar, who in his other life was the godfather of the ballad industry in American literature. And he had this sense of where he fit in the picture of things unfolding here on the prairies in the early 20th century. As he wrote, and I know some of this from his widow and then eventually his granddaughter preserving his private writings. He wrote in 1918, "The physical frontier of 25 years ago has disappeared, and a cultural frontier exists in its stead." And he wanted to be part of that cultural frontier, making a literature for the new country from its ballads. He also was interested in the ballads of the Northwoods, so in summers he'd go over and he was head caddy at the country club in Charlevoix, Michigan. He was collecting lumbermen's ballads there. During the teaching term, like over Christmas break, like the Christmas break of 1919, he was out traveling across North Dakota. I know he went to Ardagh, Rolla, Omemee, Souris, Rugby, Leeds, Brinsmead, Flora, Bremen, Wellsburg, and Surrey. That was just one trip that he made over that Christmas break. Now, the thing is, as a teenager, Franz Rickaby had rheumatic fever, and so he had a weak heart. He was turned down for the medical corps during the Great War. That's why he was out teaching in Grand Forks instead. Bad heart. The physician sold him a few years at best. But in midwinter, he's traveling by train out to all these little towns across the middle of the northern tier of North Dakota. And when he arrived there, he depended on the kindness of strangers to get him to a town hall or a church sanctuary somewhere, where he would go out with his fiddle under his arm, pull it out, and start singing ballads. And then he'd ask people, "What have you got for me?" And he would collect their ballads. But he'd be riding in open automobiles, and I'm sure open wagons behind horses, and occasionally, at that time of year, an open cutter or sleigh. He knew he only had a few years, but there was work to do. One of those trips took him to a farmhouse in Walsh County, North Dakota, where he met a woman named, what was her name? She was a Canadian immigrant. I've lost it. I've been talking about this in my Plains Folk column on Prairie Public. Pull it up from the Prairie Public website, and there's more about Franz Rickaby coming up in the next few weeks. It hasn't run yet. But he got out to this farmhouse, and the woman started singing him ballads. Whoa. Yeah. And we've got the texts that he took down, but what we don't have is the details. He was a literary guy. He got the text, but he was not an anthropologist. And he wasn't conscious of the material culture. How I wish he'd written down everything that was around him that night in that farmhouse, and what they had for supper, and all that. But that's not there. Of course, I've got a fairly active imagination. And that's what leads to this ballad. Then. If I can it's not a closed circle. I think it would be our aspiration with the Willow Creek Folk School that the chain goes on into future. So here's a bit of my contribution. You might call this a meta ballad, Dr. Kelly.
Okay.
It's a ballad about ballads.
Excellent.
And considering the circumstances of young Franz Rickaby, our North Dakota songcatcher, it's entitled Forever Young. I can all year day long sleeping under the sky, chasing after ballads, my fiddle and I, packing my life full, living every day, every dawn a gift, another tune to play. So bury me not in the deep, deep sea. Let the coyote run on the lone prairie. So many songs still to be sung. So let me be forever young. Now the balladier's life I would not exchange. I'm traveling light on an open range, like a vast library, stories every day, or maybe a stage in my life's a play. So bury me not in the deep, deep sea. Let the coyote run on the lone prairie. So many songs still to be sung. So let me be forever young. Many miles to go before I sleep, promises I made and I must keep. Shadows race across yellow fields of grain. Winter night descends on a northern plain. So bury me not in the deep, deep sea. Let the coyote run on the lone prairie. So many songs still to be sung. So let me be forever young. Kitchen table and a kerosene light, farmhouse ballad on a prairie night, some dying words, burial at sea, kitchen walls flicker mortality. So bury me not in the deep, deep sea. Let the coyote run on the lone prairie. So many songs still to be sung. So let me be forever young. Where the deer and the antelope play, it'll probably be first of the year before we'll be back with people here in the salon.
Right.
Traveling schedule, family, you understand. Where seldom is heard a discouraging word, and the skies are not cloudy all the day. Now the prayers of the banker, the prayers of the poor, the prayers of the beloved and the misunderstood, the prayers of the holy and the prayers of the down, prayers of all people are good. Say that again. Catechism lesson for tonight. Well, the prayers of the banker and the prayers of the poor, the prayers of the beloved and the misunderstood, the prayers of the holy, prayers of the damned, the prayers of all people, prayers of all people, prayers of all people are good. Where the deer and the antelope play. Dr. Kelly.
We now conclude today's edition of the Folk School on Willow Creek. We invite you to join us again after the first of the new year for more songs and stories.